All right, all right, all right. This is the final Word Cricket podcast interview tonight. With me, next to me, a man who's a member of the ICC Hall of Fame. He's an OBE. He's an Ashes winning captain, played 117 Test matches for England, 114 one-day internationals, nearly 12,000 international runs for a time, the most runs in Test cricket for England. England's team of the 20th century in Test cricket. Veteran host and commentator, Lord's Taverners president, friend of the show, returning to it, David Gower.
The only word that one would question there is veteran. So it has a certain ring to it.
You're a veteran of this interview as well. I went back and took a look at when we last spoke in depth. It was on the 9th of November, 2023, season 15, episode 10. We spoke about everything from your African boyhood, that first ball boundary to start your Test career, your early dominance over Australia, the 1981 Ashes winning captain in 1985, the Grand Slam in Australia in 86-87, Ian Botham, and all sorts of stories about both, Scottish independence, climate change, captaining in India amidst assassinations, two of them in 1984-85, the West Indies and difficulties, shall we say, against the West Indies in that era, and plenty more. And we stopped at the 1989 Ashes. So if you want to hear about any of those things about David's life, from boyhood through to 1989, there's a 105-minute chat on the feed you can go back to and listen to. But my last question on that day was, can we come back and do part two? And you were enthusiastic about doing that. So we can tear into that. And we can do everything from the 89 Ashes onwards. How's that sound?
Yeah, again, the only problem with that is that the 89 Ashes were probably singularly the worst 4 months of my entire career. And there's not a lot of there's a bit of competition for that against the West Indies, but we talked happily about 85, so beating Alan Moore in 85, and in the interim, you go through those things which are success, which is great. Everyone loves you. In my case, you go back to the West Indies again, optimistic you might actually draw a game at some stage, but that doesn't happen. You come back under pressure. You get sacked, which is all part of the game. And then, for various reasons involving off-the-field activities, the old black ball came out at the committee at Lords, and somehow the captaincy came back to me in 89. And my very, very good friend and proud Lord's Taverner, former president, former trustee now, Mike Gatting, was about to be offered the job. But one man at Lords said, no. Wasn't there an incident, which happened at a Trent Test match, an alleged incident? Because they used to have this theory in the 80s that because sportsmen are very, very bad people, if you leave them in a town centre or a city centre overnight, they will not behave themselves. So what they did, they put us into hotels. So, for instance, for this Trent Test match in a couple of years before, they put us in a very nice hotel called Roseley Court outside Leicester, between Leicester and Nottingham. Handy for me because I lived in Leicester at the time, so I'd actually go home if I wanted to. But on the Saturday night, things got a little bit out of hand. In Leeds, they put us out at Ilkley, Moor Barton, and there are plenty of pubs between Leeds and Ilkley. And so, things were not necessarily controlled as they were like. In Manchester, they put us 45 minutes away at Wilmslow, very nice hotel. But it is 10 minutes from Alderley Edge, which is a social hub for Cheshire and Outer Manchester and Wilmslow and that area. So what are people going to do? It was a theory they hadn't quite thought through. Anyway, the nub result of this was that in 89, Ted Dexter eventually came to me and said, we're unanimous, we'd like you to be England captain again.
You're back.
Which I thought, okay, fine, I quite like the idea of that. And you're never going to turn it down, especially for an Ashes series. So I said, yeah. And I remember as soon as I'd been given the job, Jack Bannister used to be on the BBC, very, very tough journalist. And the first interview for a newspaper was with Jack, and barely been in the job for 20 minutes. He said, well, what's the plan then? So it's a bit early yet. The night before the game, I'll give you a plan, which is normal. So you get into the job again. And when I can summarise 1989, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So from injuries, selection problems, we weren't necessarily the best selectors that year, just losing the first game when we shouldn't have done. I mean, there was a press conference I walked out of at Lord's allegedly to go to the theatre. Well, I mean, I was going to the theatre, that's true. But it's one of those things, and I mean, I remember these things so vividly because your absolute ambition is to do the right thing. And as I say, the Ashes is the ultimate challenge. Doesn't matter who is the best team in the world. If you can win the Ashes, you're a happy man. And so, for instance, Lord's second test of that series, we lost the first test by batting very badly on the final day at Leeds, so we're 1-0 down. I've somehow got 100 over the weekend, sort of Saturday night, and you've got to turn your mind back to the days where there were rest days. So Saturday night, we're struggling, we're coming second again. There's a press conference, I'm sort of, 10 not out or something. And I'm a bit frazzled, which is understandable. So I go to this press conference and the questions come out with 2 days to go. Can you save the game? So I'm going, can I refer the honourable gentleman of the press to my answers the first test match? And there's a heckle. Well, that didn't go well. And so this misplaced humour, which was trying to deflect from the situation, to be fair, I said, right, sorry. I mean, in my mind, there was a fuse that went, walked straight out of the room, left Mickey Stewart as the England team manager to field the rest of the questions. And I got into a cab at the Grace Gates and went down to see Anything Goes as a guest of the great man Tim Rice.
I was going to say that detail. Tim Rice being a great taverner himself.
Tim is brilliant. I mean, he's the loveliest man. His career in theatre and musicals is outstanding. He is an absolute cricket maniac. He's a fiend. And of course, he has his own team, the Heartaches, which was designed entirely, a little bit actually like some of the teams Lord's Taverners puts out, designed entirely to give the hopeless cricketer a chance to play something. We, of course, have raised the standard at Taverners.
I sometimes think we have.
Oh, no, we have. And you got to colour yourself. We know that your competitive spirit comes out at all times. The will to win is very, very evident. But Tim's team, the Heartaches, he has conscripted various rather good players at times. Tim has often famously said of his own slow left-arm spin bowling, it's so slow that if he lets it go and doesn't like it much, he's still got time to walk down and get it back before it reaches the batsman. And they have a lot of fun with their games.
But so the 89 Ashes, you go and see a Tim Rice play that doesn't go so well. The everything that can go wrong will go wrong thing. There are some parallels to 86, 87 because, of course, you were can't bat, can't bowl, can't field, worst team to go to Australia and win the lot. Australia, Alan Border's team, were the worst team to leave Australian shores and go on to win that series convincingly in 89. So maybe the judgment left a little bit.
Well, it's almost as if you need that criticism as the spur to prove people wrong. So in Mike Gatting's team, 86, 87, you're right. I mean, for the first month, looked like the worst team. We did look like the worst team ever to hit the shores. And I remember both of them. So Beefy's, a lot of people have different versions of Beefy's pep talk at the team dinner the night before the first test in Brisbane, which he sort of suddenly woke up and spoke for at least a minute. But it was basically along the lines of, right, whatever's happened in the last month, we forget that. He, of course, loved being part of a national series, was a scourge of Australia as often as he could be, and played in Australia. He became an honorary Australian. But his little pep talk was great. And Mike Gatting, as captain, was grateful for Beefy's support prior to a game, which was obviously going to be vitally important. And the opposite side of that is, having given this great pep talk, Mickey Stewart, who was in the role of England team manager for the first time, got up and said, well, thank you very much. Now, and he said something like, I'd like to think that everyone will be in bed soon, ahead of this really big day we've got tomorrow. So, 10:30, 11, good night's sleep, and we'll be ready for the morning. Beefy then undid all the good work, saying, basically with a few adjectives thrown in, if you think I'm going to go to bed and stare at the ceiling for the next 3 hours, think again. So I know some of us ended up on something called the Pink Parrot nightclub at the bottom of the Hilton Hotel, just having a little bit of a relaxing glass of something, just past the curfew at 10:30, and the following morning, everything kicked in. So I mean, it was one of those great examples of an era where you could do that. Obviously, you wouldn't admit it at the time, but someone like both of them with that huge instinct, appetite for competition, would happily come out the following morning and just get it stuck in. And his 100 at Brisbane that game was outstanding.
I was going to say, wakes up the next day and makes one of the great Ashes hundreds, doesn't he, at Brisbane in 86. So going back to where we are at the moment in 1989, there's a quirk in there as well. You make a duck in that series, and there are runs, but there is a duck. And that is the first duck in 119 test innings you played between 1982 and 1990. What an extraordinary quirk. I mean, you're often compared to Mark Waugh as a stylist of the game. Mark Waugh made plenty of ducks, but you found a way, statistically at least, to get moving in the right direction.
I suppose the good news is you only need to get one to keep that stat going. And there are, I mean, at the end of it all, one is always proud of any record that you reach. So, I mean, for instance, some years later, overtaking Geoffrey Boycott was a nice moment. We'll come back to that maybe later, but every record you have, you think, well, that's just kind of nice. Yeah. So eventually you're always aware that someone with most records is likely to go past it. And it is just a quirk, isn't it? I mean, just going through, how many innings was it?
119.
119 without a duck. Monty Panesar would love that, wouldn't he? Again, one of our great supporters at Lord's Taverners. Jimmy Anderson would love that. Yeah.
Jimmy went a long time too with that account, didn't he? I think he was in search of your England record for a while there. But I mean, I guess that's 89, and then you don't go to the Caribbean in 89-90, which is a bit of a watershed moment in what would become your next career, because that's the series that's broadcast back to the UK on satellite TV. For the first time, but it doesn't take long before. And I was surprised by this. You're 34 in 1990. In my own mind, I thought maybe you were a couple of years on from that, but you still, I suppose there's an ageless quality to the way you played the game, and that translated to the way you were interpreted. And you get back in Great Nick, a famous century at the Oval, to make sure, and I know that you're well behind in the game, but that's enough to get you on the Ashes tour of 1990-91. I mean, having not gone to the Caribbean, having returned home, having played in that heavy run-scoring summer in 1990 and proving to the world that you were still good enough at that level. How satisfying that was.
I remember the Oval, that last test against India. Yeah. And you're always aware, we had to just bat through to draw the game, which was still the challenge. And I remember going in on the evening, because Gooch and Atherton had got off to a good start. Good opening pass. I was number 3. I was flat out in the room, in the dressing rooms, not asleep. I think it's called it's something to do with alpha something or other. But it's that you're not quite asleep, but you're not quite awake. So when you hear the noise of the wicket going down, you get up. I remember walking out that evening thinking, "Yep, I'm fine. Nice evening, flat pitch, playing rather nicely for half an hour to get through, and then batting through the next day." And the line that got me was, as we walked off the field at the end of day 5, Dilip Vengsarkar, who got a lot of runs in this country, very, very fine player, sort of, very upright sort of character as well, physically and mentally. And as we were walking off, he just said to me, "You don't fit into this team, do you?" And I thought, hang on, this is no time to discuss that. And this was the Gooch era, and this was lots of training and running and stuff, which was anathema, not my favourite part of the game. And I sort of thought about that and thought, yes, but I still like being part of this whole setup. And so that 1991 tour became an interesting challenge again, because now we're on tour, now we're playing the Ashes. Graham's view of captaincy was probably slightly different to mine. Different theories here and there, but you want to be, obviously you want to be part of it, and at the same time, as a senior player who has been a captain, you also, it seems, you want to have a say as to how things could be done, should be done, in a hopefully constructive fashion. Doesn't always work. I mean, there is this curious thing which applies to politics, sport, the whole thing. If you are the outlier, you've got to be very careful you have political support in the room if you're going to make even the gentlest of criticisms.
How do you look back on that? So we go to 1990-91 in Australia, and I suppose that's where the divide between you and Gooch is seen to be. The public perception of your rift with Gooch starts to get wider through that stretch of time, and probably the peak of it is a little bit on as you left out at the end of your career. But at least at that stage. Do you regret the fact that there was a period of time, because he's been very generous on our show about you, and I know you're very generous about him now, but do you look back at that time and go, gee, I wish we just found a way to have a glass of wine together or a beer together and not have that period of time of coolness?
Well, yes. I mean, you never want that. As I say, I mean, there were things I said which, as I said, I thought they were constructive, but they went against the regime of the time. I mean, and again, going back to the theory of responding to anxiety, criticism, whatever it might be, something negative. One of my favourite hundreds of all time was the Sydney one, where we were still fielding on the third morning. And if I can, Graham's little talk to us on the outfield at the SCG before that day's place started with, and I won't do the accent because that would be unfair, but it started with, well, it's not gone very well so far, has it? I'm thinking, and that one phrase, that one sort of, really got me going. Because if you're going to say anything as a captain, and you have been fielding for 2 days and you're still fielding, it's not gone very well. It's not quite the most inspirational moment you've ever had in your sporting career. And I remember, when we eventually got a chance to bat, that, I remember the day before I got in, the night before, couldn't sleep at all. There's so much stuff going around in my mind. Normally I would be, get a decent night's sleep in, whatever, but I couldn't sleep at all. Came to the ground, had a terrible net, which is always a good sign. And then when I got the chance to go in to bat, everything clicked in, and there was a sort of fire in the belly, which adds to the normal determination, desires to do well. And I remember batting with others. So Mike, who was sort of playing the game at his pace, and was already about 70 not out when I got in. We were vying, we were 98 and 99 some hours later. And it was just a lovely thing. So that was sort of a personal response to what was going on around us. And we got to the end of that game, again, a very sort of vivid memory. We couldn't get Carl Rackman out, which is a sin against Test cricket. For some reason, Rackers hung in there. So we could have had a more viable target, but we had one of these ridiculous 150 in 2 minutes to chase. And Graham said to me, shall we give it a go? Would you come and open with me? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. We put on, 50 or 60 in quick time before things fell apart a bit, drew the test match. But then we get into Tiger Moth territory, then we get into escapades, which I don't regret because it's still a talking point 3,000 years later.
Well, we sort of pride ourselves on the final word of not asking the most obvious question. So I didn't ask Nasser about bowling first at Brisbane. I'm not going to ask you about the Tiger Moth. Simple as that. We'll brush over. Because you answer that question, how many times a year are you asked about the Tiger Moth? Well, let's do it that way.
Depends how many times I'm allowed out of home. If I am, for instance, I'll be speaking at the old cricket club dinner over the course of the summer, various places, and even if you leave it out of the speech, if someone says, well, any questions? So I might sometimes, if I want a quick night, I might just get it in early. But it's a story which takes you away from the nitty gritty of the game. And it's a story which I still quite love. I've still got, and I always say to people, my downstairs private room, that sort of bowl thing and the flushing device, has cartoons which reflect that one day. And they are favourites. My favourite cartoon of all, because put in context, whatever you're doing in Queensland, there was a Gulf War. So there were British aircraft in the skies over the Middle East. And the Telegraph, Newman, was in the Telegraph, had a aircraft identification. So you had an RAF Typhoon, an RAF Phantom, and you had a biplane with David Gower written underneath it with the rambles on the side. And so that sort of puts it into some sort of perspective. But I tell the story with glee when I'm asked. And there's some nice things that happened as part of it. It all ends with the PA system at Adelaide playing those magnificent men in their flying machines as I walk out to bat. And the sad story is that having made 200 in the series so far, and having been in flying form averaging 50, the sort of the knock-on effect of all this seemed to be that my form just disappeared. So Adelaide played terribly. Perth, the final test match, couldn't get a run, couldn't buy a run.
When Gucci bollocks you getting out ball before lunch at Adelaide, right, from memory?
Well, that was, he didn't have to say much.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd already bollocked myself
Right.
while the ball was in the air. It was one of the worst shots you will ever see in a test match anywhere in the world.
You played plenty of nice ones at Melbourne and Sydney.
Sure, actually, I'll take that. But it was one of those things where you walk off and, I mean, I was obviously livid. And believe it or not, I've been saying to myself, previous hour, where everything was wrong, rhythm, the whole thing, get to lunch, it'll be different after lunch. Get to lunch, last ball before lunch, lobs it in the air, simplest of all catches. You walk off, you can sense behind you, England captain, eyes and atmosphere sort of, and the dressing room worked it out very quickly. Because normally you go back into the rooms lunchtime during a test match. It's a batting time, so a lot of the guys will already be in lunch, but there'll be 3 or 4 people hanging around to offer you a drink, get some food, and chats, whatever you know. The room was virtually empty. One man had to stay behind to get us a drink. He pissed off mighty quick. So you've now got Graham Gooch seething, me wanting to commit some sort of ritual suicide because it's been a horrible morning. And it was just dead silent for 30 minutes until people came back in again. Graham's then going to go back and bat. And we actually came out of the game with a chance of winning, but again, another draw. And then the final straw for Graham, though, was New Zealand. We went on from the Test series, had, I think, 3 one-day games to play in New Zealand, and we had the team talk, which was along the lines of, right, yeah, it hasn't gone well in Australia, yeah, fine, point taken. But we've got a chance to finish off the tour with a little bit of pride regained if we can beat New Zealand in these 3 one-day games. First game's in Christchurch at the old Lancaster Park Stadium. And the message was, right, we'll all stick together. We're going to do just train around the outfield at Lancaster Park, stick together, show willing, team spirit, unity, the whole thing. Now, there's a guy, my namesake, in Christchurch. There is a David Gower in Christchurch, who I'd met before. And we're jogging around the field, and I see this fellow, and he's waving out. I'm thinking, now I've got a problem. Because the team thing says I need to stick with this group doing laps of the ground. The sociable thing says I need to go and say hello to my namesake. So I peeled off briefly to say, look, hello, very nice to see you again, and try to get back into the circuit as quickly as possible. And that sort of set off another fuse or two. And we didn't play very well. And it was the real downside, though, and this is one of the things that could have happened anyway, is that because of the sort of the discord, I knew that when I got back to England, so you start the season in April at Hampshire, that it just needed to click into place again. And it's one of those times where things refuse to click into place. And it's one of the things that any sportsman, any sport, any level will experience at some stage, where the harder you try, the worse it gets. And we were playing championship games, we were playing Sunday league games. Everything I tried failed. And it was a horrible month or two. I mean, the depth of the despair, I can tell you, goes like this. For whatever it was, 15 years I'd played first-class cricket. On instinct, ability, had some good times, had some bad times, but you always know you're going to come through those bad times. For this one, I had to do a sort of Geoffrey boycott, which is deconstruct the game. So literally, I hope it's an encouragement to anyone of any standard. Literally, I had Mark Nicholas, who was captain of Hampshire, right, just bowl slow, medium pace, because I had to get everything functioning. So the thing about watching the ball, which is the most basic thing in the game, I had to get myself into some sort of rhythm without someone bowling at 90 miles an hour, just to get things functioning. And Mark was very good. The club of Hampshire were really good because they were very understanding. And I played the season, started to get back into some sort of form, but not the best form. And there's no way I deserved to play international cricket that summer. And therefore, there was no way I was going to play it that winter. So I had to sort of bide my time to make a comeback.
It is an interesting dismount. So the end of the Australian series completes your very long Ashes story, 42 test matches against Australia, which is the second most to Cowdrey, who, of course, famously went 6 times to Australia across a marathon career. And then you do get back in 92 into the test team. And that's when you pass boycott for the most runs ever for England. So, I mean, eking out that one last summer as an England player did get you over the hump for that, which is not for nothing at all.
Well, I mean, the irony was that in Australia, having had that good form for 3 Test matches, I ended up with two poor returns, Adelaide and Perth, and 32 runs short of Jeff. So, whatever the team spirit, whatever the team ethic, in those last 2 games, if Graham said to me, "Well, you're not trying," I said, "I am trying," because there's lots of incentives, including boycott, trying to get past Jeffrey. And so I had to wait, 18 months or so to get back in the series against Pakistan. And I remember having a sort of saying to Graham, "Well, thanks for getting me back in, or letting me back in." And then Old Trafford was that comeback on you got Wasim Akram, you got Vakar Yunis, you got Akib Javid, Mushtaq. It's just not a bad attack, Andy. Not a bad attack. And I have the painting that was done of the moment, where you sort of glide one through cover. So it's sort of kind of a cliche, a nice cliche. And sort of, you hold your bat up. And the funny thing was that, the disappointment was I got through to lunch, still going strong, got 70 or so, got out after lunch, caught behind. Anyway, so at tea time, BBC said, "Well, would you come up and talk to Jeffrey and Tony Lewis about the record?" So I said, "I'd love to. Obviously, I'd be very proud to. It'd be absolute joy." Jeffrey went missing for a lot of the afternoon. I'm very fond of Jeffrey for a lot of very good reasons. But I one of the things I respect about him is the immense pride he had in his performance, the struggle through all his life to prove himself. From the moment at 15, 16, he walked into the auctionettes with his glasses on, saying, "I think I can bat a bit." So he's done an awful lot of stuff, which I don't think he actually believes how much he's done sometimes. But anyway, he was mighty proud of this record, obviously. And Tony Lewis was rather mischievous. And he kind of summed it up and said, "Well, Jeffrey, there are various ways of getting to 8,200 runs or so. There's David's way and there's your way. And your way, dare I say it, Jeffrey, was a bit selfish." And Jeffrey had the riposte, no, he said, "Not selfish, single-minded." But you could tell basically that he'd got his England blazer on, England tie on. And we get on fine, Jeffrey and I. But you could tell that moment where he had to concede the record of Ghana dented some of that pride. And that's completely understandable. And of course, as we all know, people then go past these figures. So Graham went past it next. People like Alex Stewart, Cruz passed. There's a fellow called Cook who got incredibly greedy. And even though he finished his career, as it were, early, and he could have, he could possibly gone on and added more and more runs. Alistair just accumulated thousands and thousands of runs and went cruising past everyone. So, I take my hat off to his powers of concentration and dedication.
And this is where your second career kicks in. So the Pakistan series ends up being it as the Test cricketer. And this remarkable blow-up, I encourage people to go and watch it on YouTube. It is available there. You're not taken to India in 1993, and it is on. The MCC pass a vote of no confidence in the selectors. Imagine that these days. The MCC passing a vote of no confidence in the England selectors because they're not taking a 37-year-old to India. We would never...
Hang on, wasn't 37?
30...
What's the maths? 35.
35. Okay. Either way, point stands that someone who wasn't in the Test team at that juncture. But no, you still go. I guess the silver lining, of course, is they take you anyway as a commentator, and this is where David Gower Part 2 begins, getting to have that opportunity to go into broadcast, and then going on very quickly from there to working with BBC and then Channel 9 and working under Richie Benno on multiple series as well, and having this whole new world open up for you, one that you remain very much in to this day.
Well, it started with sort of the odd game for the BBC, TV and radio. Channel 9 came before that series, so I'd done the World Cup in '92.
Yep.
And listening and watching Benno is the most brilliant thing. And also with Tony Gregg and that sort of the Ian Chappells, this world, Greg Chappell, it was fantastic. There is no manual. I remember going to Sydney before that World Cup, and John Gaylard, who used to produce, direct at Channel 9, the coaching session, the preparation was made. Here's a video, this is how we do it. Have a look at that, I'll see you on Thursday. So, and of course there was no VHS machine in my room, so I just chucked it in the bin. And you just have to basically survive on your own wits, as it were. So you go into the room with Chappelli, of course, who can be as argumentative. I mean, the one rule about Chappelli, who I love, and bless him, he's finally hung up the microphone in the boots. He must be about 1,002 by now, isn't he, Chappelli? But,
I think he's still doing radio. He's hung up the typewriter.
No, sure, no. But the one thing you work out with Chappelli is very interesting to talk to. One of the greatest memories for conversations, events, the whole thing. And if you want to finish the conversation, all you have to do is let him have the final word. But it's all good fun. Greggy was great. Greggy was great to be with. Asked some interesting questions on comedy. He once asked me, Greggy, he said, again, try not to do the action because that's unfair, but he said, what's more satisfying, good sex or getting 100 at the SCG?
On comms?
And you're live on Channel 9 in Australia.
Very on brand for Tony Gregg to ask that question. Yeah.
I think the answer was along the lines, well, one of them is a little bit more transitory. You can work it out which it is. But watching Bennett was great. So I'd actually been in Australia for the Australia West Indies series for the first 3 Test matches. Flew to India for that tour, which did not go well for them. And there we are. But you're right. The transition was sort of kind of in place, and my only decision the decision I had to make was whether or not to play another season of county cricket. Some people said a farewell tour, which in my mind wasn't going to work, because if you're not committed to even county cricket, you're doing it a disservice and yourself a disservice. So I took the decision, no, it's fine, I'll go. And I had Sunday Express to write for, I had Sky to work, I had BBC, bit of Sky. It all just fell into place rather nice.
There was we made a documentary, Daniel Norcross and I, during the first lockdown about the history of cricket commentary, and one of the nuggets that came out of it was that you nearly ended up as the BBC's cricket correspondent instead of Jonathan Agnew way back in 1992 or whatever it was when Agnew initially took over. So I guess that's the path not taken, but the one you end up taking is the Sky gig, when they end up getting the chance to broadcast cricket in all their might, and in many ways spoken about in kind of hushed tones, the glory days of Sky when TV budgets were more extravagant, you might say, and you got to ride that wave at a really important time as the world was getting used to what cricket behind a paywall would feel like, but also having that team of former captains and former greats who are in the commentary box with you.
Yeah, I mean, serendipity is wonderful. I mean, things fell into place because BBC, there was that time where BBC lost coverage because Channel 4 came up with a bright new idea for Test cricket. So Mark Nicholas went to Channel 4, vacancy at Sky, sided the World Cup in '99 for Sky, and then stayed for 20 years, which was fantastic. And you're right, the Sky thing in those days was they wanted both of them. They wanted myself. They wanted people, big names, to promote the coverage. The same fellow, John Gaylard, who'd been then producer-director in Sydney for the '92 World Cup, now comes to Sky. So for '99, he was my mentor. And he was an extraordinary man, John, because he could be very angry on a bad day and very forgiving on a good day. And all the mistakes, one of his sort of catchphrases was made of, no one who's never made a mistake has ever made anything. In other words, you're allowed to make mistakes as long as you're good for the rest of the time. And he was brilliant to work for. Very direct, very, dare I say, Australian, but really good to work for. So they spent the money in those days, and we were very, very lucky. So every tour, Australia, we did the Ashes in full every time, down under. South Africa, for instance, back in the fold. So we'd go with a commentary team and a production team and have a sort of couple of chairs in the stand somewhere on the edge of the field, Durban, Cape Town, Johannesburg, all the way around South Africa. So we had these fantastic times. Obviously, the incumbent duty is to produce good television. But they did look after us. And of course, things now are very, very different. Your budgets are different, production costs are different. You still see the game of cricket in high definition. You've still got as many voices as you can poke a stick at. It's different, though. I can say it's different.
But this is where, and I really admire this about your trajectory. The easy thing for you to have done after 2019 when you finished with Sky would have been, well, that was that done, and I'm going to go on the after dinner circuit. That'll be that. You become a hustling freelancer in your 60s, which is cool, right? Like that's a fun kind of quasi entrepreneurial thing that you do now. You find yourself popping up on Pakistan television for their domestic cricket on their PSL initially. You've spent a lot of time in New Zealand. You've been able to broadcast on the England men's national team again. You're in high demand on the circuit more generally. I mean, that must have been an enlivening experience going out into the open market and still realising that you had something to offer beyond what you'd carved out as a niche at Sky.
Yeah, it's been a relief, actually, in many, many ways, because the simple thing, which we would appreciate, and I think so often during the heyday, as it were, people would come up and say, I wish I had your job.
Yeah.
And any of us who've followed the game, broadcast around the world, done the travel, so you've done all the cultural stuff in India, Australia, West Indies, Australasia, everywhere you go, there's something different. And that's been just like a way of life. So I'm very, very genuinely privileged to have done that. So not doing it would be a problem. And I genuinely love doing it. And there's a certain sort of freedom by being a freelance, obviously, there's an incumbent duty to produce the right sort of words at the right sort of time, which I enjoy. So I've loved being in Pakistan. New Zealand's a fabulous country to tour. Whatever comes up, as long as I can, I happily do it. And I'm very grateful. I mean, the Pakistan thing started with a phone call, must be about 4 years ago now, so just post-COVID, or COVID was still around the world. And the phone call goes basically, can you be in Karachi in 2 days' time? And I said, well, no, I can be there in 3 days' time. I kind of got to break the news to people at home. And I went down for PSL, Pakistan Super League, and unfortunately COVID struck. So we did 2 weeks in Karachi, 2.5 weeks in Karachi. The thing had to pack up. But it was good enough to get in, foot in the door. And going back then, what I'm really proud of is that we have the tour group as well, Black Opal, who when England first toured there, 3-4 years ago, so 2 tours ago, there were people saying, well, we'd like to come to Pakistan, but what's it going to be like? So you'd be absolutely fine. They love their cricket. They love visitors. They are so grateful for people coming into Pakistan to watch cricket, be part of cricket and support them. And we had a small group of about 13 sitting in the stands there at Rawalpindi for the first game. And all the locals came round and just made them welcome. And for that month or so, it was fantastic. I mean, a really good guide. We sort of saw all the sights we could do. And Pakistan showed itself in its best light. And so nowadays, of course, the last tour, last October, bigger groups came and had a fabulous time. It's part of the world that we should promote. And to be able to say to people, yes, you'll love it, it'll be fine, you'll have an interesting... It's fascinating being in those places because they are just different.
Yeah, everyone's got their own view, but Pakistan's my favourite place to tour now, which is I wouldn't imagine saying that 6 or 7 years ago when it was seen as a place that couldn't host international cricket. And I think there is sort of a full circle here back to our first conversation a couple of years ago that, your life started outside of the UK primarily, living in Africa, having that kind of boyhood, and now still having that want to gallop around the world and follow the game that you love and go wherever it's being played. Like that passion for cricket hasn't diminished. There isn't that cynicism that you see with a lot of former pros or a lot of former test cricketers who almost make a point of being diffident about it, kind of going, oh, well, that's just cricket, and if you like it too much, there must be something wrong with you. You've never admitted that. You still have that deep love of the game, and that can be seen when you're like umpiring Taverners games or whatever else it is. Like if it's happening, you want to be there still.
Yeah, I think it's healthy enough. I think during one's playing days, the thing is to have outside interests which allow you not to rely 100% on whether you've had a good day or a bad day in the game. So outside interests are a vital part of it. And if you're a good tourist, the opportunities around the world to do things that other people would pay an awful lot of money to do. I mean, for instance, one of my favourite examples is India in the mid-80s. Calcutta, Bob and Ann Wright, who ran the Tollygunge Club in Calcutta, were also big fans of World Wildlife Fund. They had a camp at a park called Kana, and in between games, I was allowed to go on the train with them to Kana, look for tigers for 3-4 days, and experience something brilliant. And those are the things you could do in those days. Nowadays, tours aren't long enough. There are no gaps. That, you know, if you go to India as an England team, you can just about fit in the Taj Mahal, and that's about it. But these were experiences that came from the game, and were excellent, really, really fantastic things to be able to do. So when you get to the other end of it, if you realise that cricket is still the fulcrum, and you still enjoy being part of it, which I do, then you're still, as it were, gaming the system in a way. So every time the phone goes and says, "Can you make it to?" Yes, I can. You know, if I'm allowed out, yes, I can. And it's prolonging something which has just been such a great thing to enjoy. So it's human nature is to do the things you love doing, and to stop it is almost like sort of self-harm.
Let's hope he keeps answering the phone for a time. Yeah, David Gower.
Thank you.
Not only a brilliant guest on the podcast, but as has been remarked upon already this evening, now into season number 6 as Lord's Taverners president.
Probably 5. Chief Exec, how many is it now? 4 or 5?
Yeah, something like that.
A decent stretch, considering most presidents do 2 years. The voluntary contribution that David makes to this charity is extraordinary. He's the standard bearer in terms of what he does around the country and beyond, telling the great story of the Taverners. I can't tell you how thrilled the Final Word crew were last year when you were actively supporting what we were doing at the Edinburgh Marathon Festival, as I'm sure you will again this year in our London runners as well. So not just for being a great player, wonderful captain, tremendous broadcaster, but a true charitable man as well. Thank you again, David, for all you do.
Well, thank you. As we have this massive captive audience here, the great thing is that it's not hard. Mark as the chief exec, and Janine who's organised tonight, and Becky, all the people who put the time and effort into the Tavs are very, very special. I would always quote, when you come across the children, the young people who are our target, and you see what they say and do, that is the moment you realise that this is all very, very worthwhile. So I do comparatively little to everyone else, but if it's worth it, I'll happily do it for as long as they'll have me. That's a dangerous thing to say, but it's fun to be involved, which is the great thing. We said at the start of the evening, the whole ethos of Taverners is to raise money for these people.
Yep.
But by having entertaining, fun evenings, and I hope people have enjoyed the challenge of these table cricket games this evening already. And of course, there's lots more to come this year, so there's plenty to look forward to.
Indeed,
we just need to raise the money.
I was going to say, indeed, there is tonight. So I'll get some of this wrong. Janine will yell out if I do. You can keep playing your games for another 10 minutes, and that will be the point where we draw out of the hat the chance to bowl to David Gower.
Yeah.
Which, back in the glory days, might be like 10 grand for a minute or something. But tonight it's only a fiver, so do chip in. For our part, for the Final Word, we took 50 odd runners to Edinburgh last year. We've got about the same this year. We raised, I think, 33,000 quid last year. We're looking to match that, hopefully more again this year. If you're listening or watching this and you want to sign up for the 10K, unfortunately the marathon and the half marathon are full. A lot of people in this room are doing that, myself included, but the 10K is something you can do and join up with our team, and people like David will be cheering you all the way. So this has been the Final Word Cricket Podcast with David Gower. Make sure you buy your £5 tickets. You can bowl to him in about 10 minutes' time, and then we'll wrap up formal proceedings then. Good night.